DEP and the DHHR are questioning whether the dealer is training the people effectively. And they're suggesting that Board Nimona send a national person in to train the installers in this part of the state, which I think we agree with. I think it's pretty interesting that the dealer that we're dealing with is W.J. Clark, and if the commission remembers, W.J. Clark was the company that made the septic and pump tanks that the commission finally said enough, and we're going to ban those from the project because they leak so bad. So my feeling is there could be a relationship between the commitment and the effectiveness of that company when it comes to training people to put these systems in. The system that we had at Chris Campbell's, where we've had some problems that we've solved, was a system that the installer who put it in was trained by Clark. So there seems to be a pattern there. But I was encouraged that both the DEP and the DHHR sort of stepped forward and took some initiative on this. Okay, the next page deals with another one of our problem systems, and that's the system at Kevin Farrell's, and we talked about this a lot. This is the one that ASHCO's involved in. Remember, at the last meeting, I had heard from ASHCO. We began talking about how to do some remediation. I'd made some suggestions, and once I made some suggestions, I stopped hearing from ASHCO again. So this time, I sent them an email, and I carboned it to all the state agencies. And raised the issue that because ASHCO has had, up until the time when they said we're no longer in charge of the maintenance, they had responsibility under the Federal Clean Water Act to make sure the system was working. So my thought was if we raised the issue that they were in violation of the Federal Clean Water Act, maybe they'd step forward. Well, they haven't stepped forward. So what I'm in the process of doing is finishing a formal complaint to the Attorney General, which is something we talked about and something that our attorney has suggested where to go ahead and do. So I'm going to...
They didn't respond to this?
They haven't responded to it, no. And after it was emailed to them on the 25th, and then I mailed them a hard copy just to make sure some people don't read their emails. So my thought is the next step is going to be bringing the Attorney General into the situation and seeing if his office can help us move through that. The next thing that's there is a 6-page report about Chris Campbell. This is a Board Nimona system. This system prompted the letter from the DHHR and the DEP, and that was there are a couple things we learned about it. In fact, one of them I think might tie into the soccer field issue. Is the fact that this system was put in a place where we really had extra high water tables. And we did not do, I don't think, because we hadn't dealt with high water tables, we didn't do a good job trying to remediate the high water before we put in the system. So it might be something as the soccer field and the road gets talked about, they make sure that if it's a high water table issue that they get that water out of there, because it's going to be a problem. When the system went in December, all of these things have a direct discharge pipe where the final effluent comes out, and one of the things we noticed right away was there was a tremendous amount of liquid coming through. So that was sort of a clue that there was something the matter with the system. What we did was we brought a batch of people out, we looked at it, and we thought that it was because the water table was so high, somehow it was infiltrating it. So we decided to take the system out and try to put in some drains underneath. Before we were able to do that, if you look on page 2, we had a whole lot of rain, and the pump tank's a heavy-duty tank filled with water and has a pump in it. The pump tank actually popped out up through the ground and popped out of the ground because there was so much groundwater in there. We got the pump tank put back in. I think it's securely there. The next thing we did was that we began to put a drainage system in under the peat tanks that were there. And if you look on page 3, you can see that first picture. That shows you when we began digging, the water that's there is the water table. So the water table was only 16 inches deep. So what we did, we got all the tanks out. We cleaned them off because there was some worry from Board Nimona that maybe somehow the tanks had been damaged and water was coming in there. We put drain pipes down, put a gravel bed on top of it, put the tanks back in. They weren't damaged, put all new couplings in, and put a new drainage system to drain the groundwater into the creek. In the process, we did find that some of the original fittings were not glued together properly, and that could have both let the effluent leak out as well as letting groundwater leak in. So anyhow, where we are now, everything's been reseeded, looks real good. Before we did this in April, I did a direct discharge sampling, and the E. coli reading was 4,500 colonies per 100 milliliters. 200 is what we're looking for, okay? So it was way too high, so we knew that something was wrong. After we've done all this work, when we did the June reading, the E. coli reading was less than 10 colonies. So my feeling is we probably solved that problem there. But I think we've learned some things about it that we're passing on to DEP and DHHR and other installers, and one of them is that I don't think it makes very good sense, even though the manufacturer and the state has said it's okay to put these systems in inclement weather. I don't think it's a very good idea, because it seems like, everything's all clumped together. When you put things in, it can lead to banging up the pipes. You're not getting good fittings. I think the other thing that's real important that I think Board Nimona is moving toward is some recommendations about high water tables. That if there are high water tables, you've got to put some sort of system underneath everything else to drain that water away from it. So, and I guess the last thing is, because we found that there were problems there, and I wasn't on site during all the installation. I don't know whether you can expect somebody to be on site during all the installation, but the more that you can get an unbiased person there to sort of oversee, I think the better your chances are that the system's going to go on properly. I think the final thing that this brings up is, unless we find a way to cheaply monitor the direct discharge from these systems, we really don't know if they're working or not. And the state, of course, doesn't require that to happen. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but at least we're getting these questions raised. We got people at the state level looking at them. Hopefully Lincoln County will be the
Their installers cooperating and.
Yes, they've been really helpful. When in fact, they're coming back next Tuesday to look at some places.